Hello, and welcome back to the Nourish with Purpose podcast. It's Bailey, and I hope you're having a great Thursday or whenever you're listening to today's episode. On today's episode, I have on Chloe. She is the founder of Parker Pastures. She's going to share her story and everything that she does, but I did just want to kind of give you some context as to how I got into contact with her and how really I got her on the podcast. But I connected with her over on Instagram, and truthfully, I've just been very inspired by her mission and her drive. I know living in Nebraska, we are really a conventionally raised cattle state, I feel like. And personally, I have family that does that. I don't have an issue with it, but in the health and wellness space, grass-fed and finished is kind of the top best standard. And I really didn't understand why. You know, I think I've always maybe had like a little bit of a bias to think like, do we really need grass-fed and finished? And I also just have questions around that too of like, what does it look like? What's that process look like? How can you buy quality beef, quality meat? Common feedback I get from clients is like, I want to eat meat, but I don't know what is a good kind to buy. Well, through talking with Chloe, and she's going to talk much more about this, but even just the omega-3 to omega-6 balance in grass-fed and finished beef versus conventionally raised beef is different and better for you. So from a nutritional perspective, I'm like, is there really any difference? And just by what she shared, I do believe there is. However, I do have clients, I have friends, I have family, like I said, that raises cattle conventionally, and didn't want this to be something that was controversial as we're talking about this, which is so silly to me that food can be controversial, but I think it is, and I know it is because there's so much heart behind raising any type of animal, large scale, small scale. We just raised chickens, right? And there's different better practices that we could have done when we raised our broilers and butchered them. And there's just so much that goes into it, so many different ways that you can go about raising an animal to then butcher. And I just think it's really interesting to learn more about the industry from this lens and to hear what she has to share. But like I said, I think if you are in it and you are tending to animals every single day, right? It is so much work and you put so much heart and effort into it. And I think that is why this can be maybe more of like a controversial opinion or even conversation, which like I said, it is silly that food can be controversial. Nonetheless, I like to bring on people that have all different opinions, practices, and really just get opinions, get information and learn. And I think what she talks about too with even the difference of like, maybe with beef, it's not so, where we don't need to be so picky on if it's conventionally raised or grass-fed and finished. But when it comes to chicken and pork, it really, really matters what you're buying. And so I'm just excited for you to listen to this conversation and everything that she has to share. She knows a lot. She shares a lot of information over on her Instagram. You're just looking even at like chicken and going to Costco and seeing like what options would be good to buy at Costco. Is there any? So I'm going to skip the full catch up personally with what's happening in my life, and I'll do that all next week on the podcast episode. Really just want to dive into this conversation, but wanted to preface it a little bit. Also, if you want to check out Chloe and everything that she's doing, all of her information will be linked in the description of today's episode. After our conversation, I actually went and purchased 2 roasts and ground beef just to try and taste the difference, and we are waiting on a quarter of beef, and so I needed something in my freezer for the time being. So I think in the winter, getting roast is really, really good and very healing because something you can cook all day long, and it's a really easy meal for sure in the winter that I tend to gravitate towards. So with that, let's go ahead and jump in today's episode with Chloe. Hello and welcome back to the Nourish with Purpose podcast. I'm here with Chloe today. She is from Parker's Pastures, and I really just wanted her to come on to talk about really the meat industry. Something that I want to get better at doing on the podcast is having people talk actually about the quality food that we're consuming and have somebody really dive into that and how we can really make sure that we are buying the best quality food possible. So Chloe, thank you so much for being on today's podcast.
Thank you for having me on. This is one of my favorite conversations to have of just like, how do we find good food and also what is in our food that is not very good?
Yeah, because there's things that I'm sure I'm going to be blown away after today's conversation that I don't even know about specifically, I think meat is hard. I think a lot of people struggle knowing what to buy. How are we, like, are we being misled with packaging? But first, let's get to know you. So tell everybody about yourself, what it is that you do.
Yeah. Yeah, so I operate Parker Pastures, which is a high quality meat company. We are all about just like providing people with meat in the way that God originally designed, which is not cows eating corn in a feedlot. It is them on grass. And yeah, I mean, my parents started it when I was super young, so I've kind of just always grown up around. Always had meat in the freezer and like we never questioned the meat. And then after high school, I kind of went and worked on some different ranches, kind of had to get out of my tiny little small town. And then my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And that really just changed. I mean, it really changed a lot of things, but it really changed what I thought about health and food. Um, and just while she was just like battling cancer, I just really felt first it was just I came back to help my family and I was just like I just want to help where I could. And then I just really felt like the Lord placed it on my heart to take over Parker Pastures and I was 19 at the time and I just like really and still do like I just like believe we should have food that heals us, not harms us, and just in a way that God originally designed. And I yeah, just am like I never had to question the meat on my table. I still don't, thankfully, because I know where it's coming from and that's something I want other families to have. And so yeah, now I get to carry on my mom's legacy and provide families with high quality meat and also I've definitely started to like dig into like our food industry and just like kind of bringing light to things because there's a lot of things that like I didn't even know but now I do and now I'm like chances of me eating any meat that is not my own unless usually beef is okay. I'm like yeah, chicken, like my whole family knows it. I won't eat chicken unless I like know where it's from just because just the kind of just evil that is kind of gotten away with in our food industry. And so yeah, that's the other thing I'm passionate about, just like bringing light to it. And then bringing guidance of like, okay, but where do we find good food?
Mhm. Do you look back on your childhood and see like specific foods or things that you used to eat and you're like, oh my gosh, like how did I have no idea now knowing what you do?
It's actually funny. I lately have been looking back at my childhood and being like, oh, my mom actually knew what she was like talking about of like homemade yogurt and we had meat almost every meal or at least every dinner and sourdough. I was like, well, I guess I should have paid more attention.
Mhm.
I think I was exposed to what was really like really God's design mixed in with some things that weren't. Um, and I think also just like growing up in agriculture, I saw both sides. Like I saw feedlots, I saw cattle on grass, I tasted the difference. And so I think also just like having those two parallels or differences kind of shaped what I think about food, but I think more so just like how God's design was never for us to be sick
Mm-hmm.
and how that's kind of the normal. And I'm like, no, but what was God's original design? Like, how do we get back to that?
Hmm. Well, yeah, and you just see some practices or the quality of food that like is safe to eat in a grocery store, you know, of like the pops that are full of dyes and colors and gums, and then it's like, well, we can't actually in Nebraska, you can't buy raw milk, quote, like legally in a sense, where it's like how again, like how have we come so far from things that God has given us that are pretty much in their most natural state, and that's not even allowed or legal in a sense, which is just so it's crazy, honestly. And it's also scary too, because I feel like almost everybody that I know is struggling with at least some sort of like negative symptom or health concern. It's like, why are we all sick?
Hmm.
And I feel like, yeah, food, that's something I always tell people. I'm like, we eat at least 3 meals a day. So if you're concerned and you don't feel great, maybe the first place you should look is the food you're consuming because you're consistently consuming that. We have to have water and food in order to survive. So I guess you said like growing up, you saw the differences of grass-fed and finished cattle and then conventional feedlot situation. What would you say would be the biggest difference with pasture-raised, grass-fed, and finished beef?
Yeah, I mean, first, just like tangible differences is like the fat color is going to be different. Like beef that is truly pasture raised and on grass their entire life, they're like a cow that's allowed to eat tons of different plants of grass, grass plants. The fat is going to be like a yellow color. But then I was like in Costco the other day, and of course I have to go look at what the meat looks like. And the fat on this meat, which I mean, it didn't like blatantly say it, but I kind of just assumed like it was fed corn at the end of its life, and it was like a very white color. And so like that's one difference. You'll also notice like in the store, most meat is like a super bright red color. Like it's just bright red. Um, and that's usually because of how it's packaged. It's called modified atmospheric packaging. But they add like carbon dioxide and a few other gases when they're like packaging the meat, and then it allows it to stay that same color. But you don't know necessarily how fresh it is. And then like grass-fed, grass-finished beef, especially beef that like I think it's super important to note that it's like a cow could just be eating grass and just one type of grass in one little pasture most of his or her life. But what I'm talking about is like an animal that has the ability to graze hundreds of different grass plants and there's a lot of diversity. That meat is going to be like a dark ruby red. It's not a bright red, it's like a ruby red. Like my scarf would be kind of more like grocery store meat versus like a more ruby red for just like real meat, essentially. So those are like two like things that I have noticed. And then also like the flavor is another thing. I've noticed like grain finished beef, kind of conventional beef is it's kind of bland. Like you kind of got to spice it up, kind of got to it doesn't have a ton of flavor versus um grass finished is usually like has a lot of flavor. Like I don't usually spice my meat unless I want to change something up because it just has flavor. Like it kind of just needs some salt. Um, but then going into like the health side, one thing I find really interesting is um because most cattle are actually eat grass most of their life and then it's just the end of their life. Usually like 120 days or it kind of ranges, but just that little period completely screws up the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio like astronomically. It should be more of like a 1 to 1, but when cattle are fed grain, it can go from like a 1 to 50 or 1 to 20. So it's super high in omega-6s, which is super inflammatory. And so it's like it's just showcasing how like the animal was not designed to eat that. And then we're eating that, which we weren't designed to eat either. And it just like it's not ideal. And so those are like some just like subtle but massive differences as we just kind of talk about that. And the other thing that's I've learned is just because it's labeled grass fed does not mean it's grass finished. Because it can say grass fed and it's not regulated, and usually most cattle eat grass some point in their life. But it's super important that it's like grass fed, grass finished, 100% lifetime grazed, or there's different terms, but it's like a cow that is just eating grass her entire life.
Hmm. That's so interesting to hear you even talk about the omega-3 to omega-6 balance. I would have never thought about that when it comes to like the meat that we're consuming. Um, which I'm just like, even like the color of meat, I'll notice, and it's hard, I think, if you're going to a grocery store to like actually get quality beef. I
Mm.
feel like kind of like so to hear you talk about like how the taste of grass-fed and finished taste, like the meat tastes different and it tastes better, because obviously like I'm in Nebraska, so it's a lot of conventional, like people raising beef very conventionally. And with that, I've heard the argument like grass-fed and finished tastes like nothing. Like it doesn't taste good. The corn-fed is like what like that beef tastes better. Have you heard that argument as well?
Yeah, definitely. And that's a good point because it does matter like how an animal is finished because that kind of
Mhm.
does determine, and I've heard like which is true, like grass-fed beef can be tough or kind
Mhm.
of yeah, like not a flavor that we're used to or gamey. And something I've learned is just like how that animal is like what I call finished, but like the end of its life, how it kind of spends its time, what it's eating really kind of determines that. And I mean, like, I'll just take like the beef I eat, like Parker Pastures beef. It does have flavor and it does have marbling. And it's like a well finished, grass finished beef.
Mhm.
But I've also had beef in the past where it's like it's super tough or it doesn't have a lot of flavor or it tastes kind of like a deer, like it's really gamey.
Yeah.
And most of the time I've just noticed it's totally just how that animal spends its end of its life.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that definitely can be true. Like I've heard that before too.
Yeah. Well, and I think with that, like, if you're expecting grass-fed and finished beef from Walmart to taste as good as like what you produce, it's just not going to even be a comparison because I'm sure, I mean, the quality is so much different from when like how that animal was treated and raised and finished. Whereas like if you go to the grocery store, I think that's where again, like people are like, if I'm going to shop at the grocery store, what do I pick? So if somebody's going to the grocery store to buy beef, like, what should they look for? Is that even like a suitable quality, or should they always be looking at like smaller farms or different sources, I guess, to get their beef from?
hmm I've really tried to like investigate grocery store meat to like approve it, and every different grocery store I've been to, I just can't.
Mm.
Like it's questionable. It's also something that totally grosses me out is how the meat is like raw and it's not frozen. And it's like it can have a long, it can be on the shelf for a long time. It also loses some nutrients because it's not like flash frozen and
Mhm.
which locks in the nutrients. So grocery store meat, there's nothing that I've found that I can like back. But what I would look for is someone that their cattle are grass fed and grass finished, and that they are like eating a diversity of plants, and then that beef is flash frozen because that'll just like lock in the nutrients, and usually the best option with that is like um, smaller family farms or like meat companies that are super reputable, because that also allows you to ask questions. But honestly, at the end of the day, it's like, what does it taste like and what does it look like?
Mhm.
Because if it looks like yellow fat and dark ruby red meat and it has a lot of flavor, more likely than not, that's some pretty good beef.
Mhm. Okay, yeah, and that's good to know. I didn't think about like the freezing part either, like flash freezing, because we look at that from like a vegetable perspective. Like, yeah, if you do fresh, frozen, then canned is kind of like the progression of quality. Whereas like, yeah, frozen vegetables can be really nutrient dense. That obviously that correlation makes a lot of sense when it comes to beef as well, or chicken, I would assume. Because do you just raise cattle or do you also raise chicken?
We work with a few farmers and we do pasture-raised chicken, and then we have our grass-fed, grass-finished beef, grass-fed, grass-finished bison, grass-fed, grass-finished lamb, and then we did turkeys, pasture-raised turkeys for Thanksgiving.
Wow. Okay, so that something like you have like alone on your own farm, or you contract out and you work with different farmers in the area?
I've learned that I cannot do everything well, but there's people who do things really well. So I work with like the best of the best, highly vetted
Mhm.
farms and ranches in partnership and collaboration. And that's why I'm like, I can have diversity of proteins that it's like if I feel good about eating it, then I feel good about providing it. And also like it makes meets all of our standards. So yeah, I just work with a few very select, highly vetted farms and ranches that way we can kind of
Mhm.
provide all of these different proteins.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if we think about like from the conventional perspective, what would be something about beef production that would shock most consumers?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, I mean, I think the life cycle of an animal is interesting and important of like most I believe kind of based on some statistics I've looked at recently, there's about 600,000 ranches in America. And the average age of the American farmer or rancher is over 60 years old. And most like this life cycle of most beef is it's born on a ranch and mama cow has her baby. They spend all summer together and then in the fall that calf, that baby is weaned, and then either it'll stay on the ranch or it'll be sold to somebody else. And then that winter, it can either be on pasture or sometimes they are fed a little bit of grain. Kind of just depends on whose operation and what it looks like. And then usually that next summer, it's spent, so it's like about a 1 year old, it's spent on grass. And then it goes into a feedlot. And usually these cattle are harvested at about like 18 to 24 months, sometimes even like sooner. So not very old. And then yeah, they're into a feedlot, and that's how they're able to get really big and really fat really fast, which we discussed that is not healthy for the animal. And then they're harvested. And so that's kind of like a life cycle of most beef. About 85% of beef is goes through this life cycle and is in a feedlot at the end of its life.
Mhm.
Um, Beef, honestly, in my like investigations of like meat, beef usually is okay. Like ideally grass-fed, grass-finished is the like ideal, but
Mhm.
also it's like if you're gonna choose like processed food over beef, even if it's conventional, like usually beef's gonna be a better option. It's the other proteins that really get concerning, like chicken, for example. Chicken is kind of just absolutely disgusting, because most of them never see the light of day. They're just in these very confined areas. And then at processing, because there's the risk of E. coli and salmonella, and there are hundreds upon hundreds of thousands of birds processed at once, they are
Mhm.
usually dunked in some form of like a chemical bath. Usually it is like chlorine, bleach. And then what's crazy is the chicken can absorb up to like 15 to 20% of that water. And then A, the customer's charged for that. And then B, it's like that's like chemical water in your chicken that you're then heating. So that's why like chicken will shrink a lot when you're cooking it or
Mhm.
something like that. And so I have learned like chicken is a big one where it's like you want to know where it's from, pasture raised, and definitely not, it's important that it's like either air chilled or just it's cleaned in a way that is not using chemicals.
Mhm.
um and then pork also is kind of one of those things that it's one of the highest parasitic foods, I think that's
Mhm.
how you say it. And so like that is really disgusting. Even pasture raised actually can sometimes be high, just because pigs are naturally kind of scavengers. Um, and so I really like to focus on ruminant animals or really good chicken. It's like lamb or beef or bison, because those animals are designed to graze grass and convert it into meat or milk. And that's also like what we are designed to eat. Like it just talks about meat in the Bible so many times.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like I just keep going back to like what's God's original design, and then let's like build off of that. Let's go back
Mhm.
to that.
Oh yeah, the chicken conversation is something that I mean, you don't think twice about it. Like especially like when I was in college, like going to Trader Joe's and getting frozen chicken. It's like, oh, whatever. And then you like cook it and you're like, okay, why are there so many like strings in my chicken? Like it just like it's the quality is disgusting. So actually over the last couple of years, we've raised broilers and then butchered them here on our farm. So I'm on 3.5 acres, but we did that with another family, and even just like the processing of that, like it is such a process, and there's no way that they could do it like that on like a large scale, you know? So like you talking about even the water that they're absorbing with like the chlorine and bleach, or like you said, like you're buying chicken by the pound, so you're paying for really them to have chlorine and bleach within your chicken, which I'm guessing also contributes to like the breast size. Like when you're buying it, like it's going to be much larger maybe in a package, but then like you said, it shrinks when you're cooking it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that is an effect, and also just how they've like bred chickens. They have like genetically just bred them to have like ginormous breast and
Mhm.
grow really, really fast. And so it's like it's not actually natural for a chicken to look like that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, because it's like 6 weeks, you know, where they can reach like full maturity, where you can butcher them, which is yeah, it's extremely fast. And I feel like the just the quality or like even maybe like the toughness of the protein. Like if they're having to grow super quickly and put on a lot of weight, I'm guessing that's also going to impact. I mean, again, everything just comes back to like the quality of meat due to like how the animal was maybe created or the, I guess, bred in a sense too.
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's very interesting where I'm like, oh, and we're gonna eat that.
I know. Well, and it's something where, like, from a nutritionist perspective, I could say, like, well, yeah, make sure you're eating a lot of protein. But then if you're not getting specific about the protein, not that I would say it maybe would cause an extreme adverse effect in their body, but like, protein is not just protein, like, especially animal protein. Like, there's so much more that goes into it, which is why I think this conversation is so important because most people have no idea, myself included. Like, when I go to the grocery store, like, is this actually quality? So, like, again, coming back to if you were to buy beef at the grocery store, I know you said we're looking for like that ruby color. And also the fat should be more like a yellowish color. What about chicken? If you're going to buy it from a grocery store, what would you look for? Is there a suitable option when you go shopping at like a Walmart or Costco or Sam's?
Um, I have not found any that I'm like I would feel good
Mhm.
about recommending, but things that I would look for, whether it's like, I mean, I would go to somewhere where you can really trust and like trace it back. But you're gonna want something that is usually air chilled, or not using like bleach to process it. Pasture raised, and not free range because that's not actually true. And trying to think of the other there's different like labels and claims, but pasture raised, it's not always 100% accurate like at the store, but usually it's a little bit better. What else? I mean, those are kind of the big ones. And then also just like looking at the quality of like the color of the meat. I like got some chicken from the store the other day and then like did a side by side of the chicken that we have. And the chicken from the store is like very white. Versus the like chicken that Parker Pastures we carry. It's like it's kind of got a pink tint to it.
Mhm.
Um and I think that just comes from like the chickens are like they are on pasture. They are eating all these different bugs, but also they're moving around, which I
Mhm.
think is very important of like they're moved every day versus like in a conventional setting. They're just in like big barns. Like
Yeah.
Googling a picture of it is like it's really honestly sad.
Mhm.
And but it's like the animals are not allowed to like move around, build their muscle. And yeah, so those would kind of be like, okay, is it air chilled? Is it pasture raised? Does it have kind of like a pink color to it, or is it just like really pale?
Mhm.
And then also one thing to look for on the label of like, can you tell if it's like either air chilled or not? Sometimes it will just say air chilled, or usually it's in very small writing. It'll say like 3 or 6 or something% retained water. If it
Oh.
says that, that means it was either injected with something or at processing it like absorbed water. Um, and so like just we don't want anything with that because then you're also paying for water and not chicken.
Yeah. Do they have to be, I'm guessing they don't have to be transparent about what they would inject it with?
No, and I've like looked up what they can inject it with and it's like a very broad range of things. Yeah, but it just has to say retained like percentage of retained water.
Mhm.
Um, but it doesn't have to be specific on like what that is.
Yeah, that's concerning. I also, I mean, like you said, looking up photos too, and I've seen that like just different like side by side comparisons. But even when it comes to, like the egg industry, I feel like, I mean, my parents raised chickens as well, like for eggs or like laying hens, and that's where it's like you look at just the big barns that these chickens are in these tiny little cages and their eggs just roll to like a common source where they can gather them. But like they're in a tiny crate. And I would assume it's very similar. Like when they're raising meat birds, birds for meat, they are in the similar environment where like they can't really move. They maybe have like 1 foot, like one, I don't even know what, maybe like how much space they like legally need, but I know it's not a lot where they can actually move.
Yeah, I can't remember top of mind, but yeah, no, it's like very limited and even like different like I'm trying to there's free range and then cage free and
Hmm.
like the regulations on those terms, it sounds like really good, but it's actually not it's not what it sounds like.
Yes. And the marketing, I mean, those marketing companies are working so hard to like make the consumer believe they're buying the best product when in reality, like we don't ever really know what we're buying, especially like when we're going to a grocery store to get our protein sources, our meat. So I want to talk about other ways that we can use beef because I know like you sell like whole cows or a half a cow or a quarter of cow that you can get or a quarter of beef that you can get.
Yeah, so that's like the rancher's secret of like buying in bulk. It's usually gonna be the best, like most affordable way to buy beef and
Mhm.
most convenient. So a kind of like a couple rules of thumb that I use is usually you need about 1 cubic foot of freezer space for every 30 pounds of meat. A quarter cow is usually like around like 100 plus pounds, and that's great for like an individual or a couple for a year. And then a half a cow is usually around like 200 pounds, and that's great for like a family of three or four. And then a whole cow is always going to be like the best price per pound, usually around like 400 pounds of meat. And that's great for like if you want to split it with friends or family, or if you're like me and just eat a ton of beef, or like kind of like family of four plus. And so like that's definitely like highly recommend that way of buying meat, but that's also like the investment and the freezer
Yes.
space. And so we also have like we have a Parker Pasture box subscription. So that's like if you want like a monthly delivery of beef and chicken to your door, that's a great option. And then we have like individual cuts of like if you want to just pick out your steaks or roast or chicken breast. So we kind of just try to have all those different options depending on what people need. Um, but yeah, that's kind of what I always recommend buying in bulk, but that is sometimes not always achievable, but something that I like recommend working up to. And it also allows you to use the whole animal as
Yeah.
well. Um, yeah.
So you include like the liver and then I also saw a post of yours about the heart, like the beef heart and like cooking that as well. So I'm very intrigued with like if we're not looking at the most common forms like or ways to use an animal, but if you're looking at like the heart and the beef liver, is that something that you include? And then also like how do you consume that?
Yeah, it's optional if you want to have like heart, liver, bones like added with your half or whole cow, like absolutely. I hate the taste of liver, so I've made an ancestral blend, which is 10% heart and liver mixed in with our ground beef, and I can't taste the like livery organ
Mhm.
taste. So that's something that I will eat a lot of because then I get the nutrients without like the awful taste. And then beef heart is honestly a good like nutrient dense like organ cut that is not super strong. Like I've soaked it in like milk, or I think you can do salt water as well, and that kind of helps like mitigate the flavor a little bit. And I'll like do it in a stew or kind of something like that. Or you can even it's kind of similar to a steak, maybe a little more rubbery. That sounds gross, but it's not. So like that's a good one. And then like bones are awesome for like bone broth.
Mhm.
Um those are kind of like my main things that I try to do to like so it's enjoyable, but I still get the health benefits of the organs.
Yeah, I like that 10. It's good to know a ratio of like 10% of heart and liver in like an ancestral blend because we usually get a quarter of a cow of quarter beef, but that's where which I always say that wrong. I always say like cow, but is that like not grammatically correct? Should we say
You can
quarter
say
beef?
you can say I say either. You can say
Okay. I'm like,
either.
wait a second. I don't feel like that's like correct to say it that way. But anyway, we usually get a quarter of beef, but then like with the liver, like I've tried blending it up, but I never know how much to add to like a pound of ground beef. So that's a really good ratio because even from a nutritional perspective and mineral perspective, like I look a lot at like how can we get more B vitamins or folate or all of these factors into our diet. And a lot of it comes back to beef liver, which I'm always like, also, if we look ancestrally, like what were our ancestors consuming? They were consuming beef or not beef. They were consuming beef liver a lot more regularly. And I'm like, now that's something we view as like disgusting or gross or could never eat that. But it's just so interesting, like how many nutrients we're able to get from consuming beef or consuming heart.
Yeah, my like good my go-tos is yeah, like ancestral blend or using the heart or one of my friends does like she makes a beef liver capsule, Rewilding
Mhm.
is the name of her brand, and so that's like awesome. And then my current favorite thing is to make homemade pho, and make the broth. With the broth is so good because it has a little more flavor
Mhm.
than like bone broth, and then add like the noodles and some other meat, to
So you
like
make broth with the liver.
no, with bone broth.
Oh, with bone broth. Okay.
Yeah, no, broth
Yeah.
with liver, I don't think I'd be that brave.
I feel like, yeah, it has like more of a metallic-y taste.
Hmm.
Really, the liver does. Yeah, so that's really interesting. So you can like get the bones, you can get the heart and liver when you order. And then how do you deliver that too? I'm just thinking like if it's 400 pounds, like what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have insulated boxes and then dry ice, so then the meat is frozen and arrives frozen. And like a whole cow, it is pretty epic. Actually, it's usually like 10 or 12 pretty decent sized boxes just like delivered to somebody's door. But it works pretty good.
That's crazy. I can't imagine like, yeah, getting that delivery or the poor person that has to deliver that, where they've got like, I don't know how much each box weighs, but I can't imagine if it's 10 bucks and you've got like 400 pounds of beef. That's
Yeah,
crazy.
it's definitely a lot of meat. But yeah, that's usually kind of how that works, which we kind of do it all the time, which is wild.
Mhm.
But
Oh my gosh. So, what do you feel like you've learned throughout the process? I mean, I know you said at 19 you took over. Is that correct? Parker's Pastures. Like, what do you feel like from then to now you've really learned either like about yourself or about the industry that's like kind of changed your perspective on things?
I think going back to God's original design of
Hmm.
just like, okay, what was it like in the Garden of Eden? What is it like in the book of Revelation? And then like things in between. And like God is a God of health and healing and abundance. And he like gave us good food to eat. But the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And I just see that so prevalent in our food system and all of our health. And so something that I feel like I've just like personally been leaning into, but also as I just like think about things on a greater scale of just like, okay, what is God's original design? How do I live like that? How do I eat like that? It's
Hmm.
really simple. It's like meat, it's vegetables, it's like honey and bread and just like going back to that. And then also like how is it raised? Because I have learned that that does matter. Um and just like kind of like bringing more intentionality to it. And also like letting go of the lie of convenience because I think that's something that I've caught myself in of like, oh, well, I just like, I'll go grab something or a granola bar or something because it's like fast and easy and convenient. Um, but it doesn't necessarily bring life and health. Um, and so, yeah, just like slowing down and actually cooking meals and just like going back to like, okay, what was God's original design here? Because like that was not flawed. So how do we
Hmm.
just like live in that and exist in that? And like, no, it's not going to be perfection. But I think that's been like a good guiding post because it's also like there's so much in the health world where it's like, don't do that, do that. And it's like overwhelming. And so
Hmm.
that's something that's also just personally helped me, and kind of just like using that lens to like think about things.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned too, like that simplification, because I do think like even with what I do, I'll see people like, well, I want a recipe. Do you have a recipe for this? I'm like, I really like go into most meals thinking we need a protein source, we need a vegetable source, we need a carb, and we need some source of fiber. Like, what's that going to come from? What vegetable? And it's, or a fat source. And it's simple. It's structuring a meal so that it's not overwhelming. You don't need a lot of recipes. You don't need a lot of spices and seasonings and all these things to add to a meal if you're consuming quality meat sources that don't need a lot. And then you're pairing it well. Like you said, it can be very simple, but we have overcomplicated it. And I think that also, we live in a very busy society that prides ourselves on being busy. So if we slow down, like a lot of us will claim we don't have the time to actually make a meal. And then I always think too, that's a good time to assess our priorities and our values and like the pillars of our life of like, do you value quality food? Because if you do, that does require you to put more effort and time into that and not go through McDonald's on the way home from work. Or, I mean, it's just crazy. Like when you look at fast food and that whole industry, like you're never getting the best quality of anything. Like you can control quality so much more when you're cooking it within your own kitchen,
So
which
true.
I feel like is a huge piece of like, yeah, God intended us to consume quality food, not just what's convenient, not what's easy, not something that has no care or intention put into it, or behind it, which I do think like coming back to what you do is a big piece of buying from ranchers and farmers like you know, and making sure you're consuming something where even just hearing like your values too, like you have so much intention behind what you're doing and you can tell that you genuinely care about the animals that you're caring for, which is rare, I would say, or it's hard to see somebody that has so much heart behind it. As something for you with like the time piece and having maybe to make the time to cook a quality meal, like how do you do that while also owning a business?
I eat a lot of ground beef.
Mhm.
Like just I kind of just go to like really simple and easy things where it's like ground beef because there's bajillion different things you can do with it and it's really easy. Um, or like a roast or like something like kind of like that can cook throughout the day.
Mhm.
Um, I've also learned if I just like have meat thawed in the fridge, I'm way more likely to eat that than I am to like grab something where I know it's not necessarily gonna make me feel the best.
Mhm.
Um, so those are kind of like my go-tos just to make it like because I am about like okay how do we make this easy too and so it's just like what are easy ways to just cook meat because I love what you just shared about just like basing like creating a meal kind of based on those principles. It's like hey what's the protein gonna be and if it's like there's some meat thawed in the freezer or thawed in the fridge and it's really easy to cook up then it's pretty
Mhm.
easy to kind of just like piece together a very good meal.
Exactly. I got this tip from somebody, and we try to follow it in our household too, of like having a bowl that stays in the fridge, and anytime it's empty, you replace it with ground beef or sausage or something, so that you always have a thawed protein. Because I will say that is like the one not complaint, but one thing that I hear a lot of clients say of like, it's just so hard to prepare protein. Like if my protein's not prepared, like it's really hard to put a meal together. And so it is like, how can you just think ahead or like get roast? And I think that when you are able to get a quarter, half, or whole beef of beef, that's just a huge. I mean, you're already relieving the step of like needing to go to the grocery store, but you go to your freezer and you have all different cuts and kinds that you can choose from like to put in a crock pot. I do feel like that is it's helped us a lot too to make sure like we are always having a protein with each meal is to make sure it's stocked in our freezer, which is yeah, I think a huge piece too. If you struggle with the convenience or want something that is more convenient, just having something thawed all the time can be really helpful.
Absolutely, for sure.
Yeah. So I want you to share. I know obviously we've talked about what you do, but share more about like what you do. I mean, not even what you do, but like if somebody wants to order from Parker's Pastures, like what does that process look like? How do they get into contact with you? What is the amount of time that it takes to get beef or chicken or turkey? What does that look like?
Yeah. So parkerpastures.com and we have all the options of like if you want whole, half, quarter cow or individual cuts or whatever that looks like. And then usually if you order within like a week or so, it will be delivered to your door. We ship on Mondays and Tuesdays. And so depending on different states, it'll usually get there in about 2 to 3 days. And it just arrives in a box, insulated box, with usually the dry ice is dissipated by then, but it arrives frozen right to your door. So it's a super easy and convenient way, and then just put it in the freezer. Um, yeah, so that's kind of best option. And yeah, if anyone ever has questions, please reach out. And yeah, so parkerpastures.com and just kind of figuring out what's the best option for you.
Okay. And I'll have all of your information in the description of the episode too, so people can also check out your Instagram because what intrigued me was just what you have done in comparison of like I saw like your chicken breasts or and like when you're going from the store, like what does that look like and what are the differences? So you do so much education on your Instagram that I think would be really insightful for people to also check out. Is and what's your handle on Instagram?
First, thank you. I really appreciate that. And then it's Parker Pastures grass fed.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, like I said, that'll be in the description. But so if you want to check that out, obviously look there. But otherwise, yeah, I love learning more about it because I mean, I grew up like my grandpa raises cattle, but at the same time, like I don't see the whole process. I don't see the whole process and lifespan of the animal all the time and like what that looks like. And so I just think the education is something people need more of, especially when we're thinking about like how can we consume the best protein source possible when it comes to animal protein. And so yeah, ordering from farmers and ranchers like you, I think is huge, a huge piece of the puzzle to making sure you are actually getting the best of the best.
Yep, absolutely. And I've like learned of like especially in the summertime, it's like going to local farmers markets or
Mhm.
like it can be pretty accessible to get good food. It just takes like a different mindset of like instead of going to the store, go to your
Mhm.
freezer or go to a farmer's market. And it's crazy the taste difference where it's so much just like it just tastes better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know like when you try that and you like try the side by side comparison, which I'm gonna do that now. Actually, that you mentioned that, I'm like, I need to do a side by side because I will say like we go to Walmart and we try to get like in their green package, like the grass fed and finished, just because we don't have any beef in our freezer right now. But I'm like, I just don't know. Like, does it really taste good or is it just what I have access to? So I'm gonna do a little taste test now that you've mentioned that and see, yeah, just see the difference.
Yeah, let me know what you think. I'm curious.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chloe, so much for being on today's podcast episode.
Thank you so much for having me.